Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast where we talk about the movies that never made it to the screen, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka.
And this is part 2, right?
Yes. We had decided to make this, or at least I decided to make this a 2-part episode after doing the research.
After writing 7 pages of research.
Yeah, 7 pages of this whole story. I mean, after we did Spider-Man, and that ended up being, I think that was like 4 or 5 pages long, and that dragged on for so long. I figured we're not going to try and make 2-hour-long episodes. I figure people
Absolutely.
have more to do than to listen to all of that, so we might as well break it up.
Yeah.
We stopped in the middle of this, but you had not seen any of The Thief and the Cobbler, so now we are back, and now you have filled your brain with... I actually don't know which version you watched.
Last night, I went ahead and watched all of the Recobbled cut Mark IV. But from what I found, that was the latest version available. And then I also went ahead and watched the 2012 documentary Persistence of Vision.
Okay.
Had you watched that, Dan?
That documentary I have not. I've watched many video essays, so like anything that was available on YouTube, and then just reading through articles, any interviews, and, well, the Wikipedia page provided a lot.
The documentary was definitely interesting. There wasn't really a lot of information in that wasn't in the conversation we had with last episode, but it was still really interesting to hear everything first person from these animators' mouths of what happened, the archival footage of Richard Williams, because I think you mentioned last time, he doesn't really like to talk about this experience. He declined to be interviewed. All the clips of Richard Williams are all archival footage from whatever he could find, and he had a couple of interviews with animators who were a part of the project. Yeah, it was a pretty well done documentary, but I didn't really learn anything new through the process of watching it that we didn't go over last episode.
Okay, so it looks like we are doing our job well.
Excellent. Yes. The research is lining up. We found our information in multiple sources. It's trustworthy. But, if you find something wrong, don't sue us.
Yeah. Or send us an email at notgetmade@gmail.com.
notgetmade@gmail.com.
Yeah. So let's continue on. Last we left off is that I said that everything had changed on May 13th of 1992. This is kind of like the day that lives in infamy. This is the day where the trajectory of where Williams thought The Thief and the Cobbler would go then drastically changed. Williams, on that day, that's when he showed Warner Brothers the rough version of the film, and it was not well received. In fact, he was missing an entire reel for the screening.
Oh, wow.
No one knows what happened to it. It was just gone. It also didn't help that some of the scenes were filled in with storyboard stills and still had pencil animation. Right off the bat, it looks like this guy is completely unprofessional, thinking that, well, this guy's been working on it since 64, and we finally gave him the money to do all this and put this all together, and we gave him all the best animators in the world, and somehow it feels like he didn't go through with it. It also didn't help that he also missed a few deadlines as well. So the fact that he missed deadlines, animation wasn't complete, everything wasn't finalized, and a reel was missing, if I was a producer in that situation too, watching it, be like, the film's not complete, you don't have everything prepared, what are we supposed to do with this? Give you more money to finally finish this? I can see why they would back out of it, but I mean, their execution as to what they did next, I do not agree with. Warner Brothers, they backed out of the production, and then that left the Completion Bond Company to seize control of the project. And that's when the producer Jake Eberts from Allied, he eventually dropped out of the production too. Dick would finally see his dream realized of The Thief and the Cobbler go on the big screen, only it would not be the film that he wanted to see, since Dick was fired from his own movie. Whew. That's like when you hear like Steve Jobs got fired from Apple.
Yeah.
I made this company. How could you just get rid of me? Sue Shakespeare, she tried to salvage some of the movie, or at least the trajectory of it. She's from Creative Capers Entertainment. She proposed that they would bring Terry Gilliam to consult with the story of the film.
Monty Python, the Flying Circus.
Who is a former Monty Python and director of the films Time Bandits, Brazil, and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
Not familiar with that last one, but I definitely know Terry Gilliam.
Yes. And Dick would be allowed to work on the film under the supervision of Sue. And Williams agreed to that proposal. That sounds like a great idea. But instead, the Bond company went with a far cheaper option, and then they had Fred Calvert take over the project. Do you remember Calvert?
No.
Fred Calvert, he was the TV producer who was sent over to the animation studio to check in on them. And he was the one who reported saying that this place is so unorganized. They didn't even have storyboards until I showed up. They're far behind. It's that guy. And now he's put in charge of the project. Calvert, he had this to say when they made that decision. I really didn't want to do it. But if I didn't do it, it would have been given off to the lowest bidder. I took it as a way to try and preserve something and at least get the thing on the screen and let it be seen. Calvert took about 18 months to finish the film, turning it into a Disney-like musical, something Dick tried in all of his efforts to avoid. 4 songs were added and cheaply animated so that they would have this appeal to the Disney audience. I watched the Recobbled cut. I watched that one first, and then I watched the Miramax version after that.
Oh, you actually watched the released Arabian Night.
Mm-hmm. You can definitely see the difference in the songs, or at least in the animation, because there's this fluidity, and you notice this when you watch the film. Like, there's this fluid motion that comes with this animation, and then once it hits the song... it feels like a different movie.
Yeah.
I mean, the characters have like a goofier look to them. Their movements are much more stagnant and still and stiff. And especially for like when you're doing a musical number, I mean, this is the opportunity for characters to move around and dance and such.
Yeah.
And the fact that during these song numbers, the characters, they were more stiff during something that should be energetic. It just didn't fit. And it didn't, I don't know, it didn't work. There were 4 songs. The songs were written by Norman Gimbel and Robert Folk. And for the songs, they mostly fell flat and they were not memorable at all.
Yeah.
And to speed up productions of the songs' animations, they were actually outsourced to different studios. So there was the song She Is More.
But she is more than this. There's a mind in the body of this pretty miss.
Which was animated by Sullivan Blue Studios. Am I Feeling Love?
Don't fight your feelings, says my heart. A heart I will obey. Am I feeling love?
Which was done by Kroyer Films. Bomb 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 Bim Bomb, aka What You Get for Not Going to School.
We don't know when to return because no one here can read his orders.
We're what happens when you don't finish school. Bing bong booly booly bibbly boo. We're what happens when you don't finish school.
That was made by Calvert's studio, and It's So Amazing was done in studio.
Somehow it's so amazing. Who could explain? Who could predict this love is so amazing? Who ever thought? Who
these songs were awful. I mean, right off the bat, we have She Is More. That is Princess Yum Yum's I Want song. And all she's stating in there is that I know there's something more for me, but I'm cooped up in this castle and I don't do anything. But I want something more. I need something more. It's so vague and uninteresting. You can definitely tell that they were like, hey, just make it like a Disney song, but don't go note for note.
Yeah.
Try to make it like just different enough so that we don't get sued. They're awful, and it felt like they didn't take any time. The thing is, with Disney animation, the music is thought of while scripting the story. And the music can work in with the story, whereas these songs were just inserted into the movie, and it feels like they're all out of place.
Yeah.
Technically, they are.
Yeah.
Cobbler was in charge of creating a coherent story in order to finish the film. He reordered a lot of things. And there was one story element that I agreed with that I didn't agree with The Thief and the Cobbler. When you watch The Thief and the Cobbler, the introduction of One Eye. One Eye! And that one wounded soldier who's trying to get out of the battle and warn the king that danger is coming. What they did in Cobbler's version was that he had pushed that scene sooner, so that right away you saw that there was this imminent threat out beyond, well, in this case it was Baghdad, but you immediately saw there was this imminent threat coming to the city. There was a soldier who is wounded and he has to make his way back, and then you go into the city where everything is peaceful, and you just have this in the back of your head fear that the army of the One Eyes are coming.
I was expecting you to say that they cut that down a lot shorter. One of the things they brought up in The Persistence of Vision, some of the animators were talking about how since there was a lack of storyboards, there was kind of a lack of plan as well, and they were just kind of making sequences, and Richard Williams would start to just on the fly be like, oh, we should add more here and add more here. And they mentioned specifically the dying soldier, how it started off as like a 10-second sequence, and then he really liked it, so then it got expanded to 15 seconds, then 30 seconds, and then the final version of it was over a minute long of this dying soldier getting back on his horse to ride to the Golden City.
And that was another thing that bugged me about Williams' version, is that it felt so slow. It felt like they were so focused on the animation that they disregarded pacing. Once you got the idea of the shot, it felt like it lingered on for a little longer than it needed to. And that soldier sequence, I think, is a great example of that, where if he had gotten up there in 10 seconds, I would have been absolutely fine with that. You get the idea of what's going on, but he wanted to linger on that shot for so long, you eventually get bored of it, and you're just like, I get it. Just get on. Just get on the horse. Come on. Let's go.
Yeah.
Cobbler, he ended up using up about half of the completed animation for the final cut, but because they were losing a lot of this gorgeous animation, Cobbler ended up inserting a lot of those animations into the end credits so the audience would at least have a chance to see some of this. Cobbler even said, "We hated to see this beautiful animation hit the cutting room floor, but it was the only way we could make a story out of it." Williams was kind of Rube Goldberging his way through. He didn't always step back and look at the whole thing as a story. He's an incredible animator, though. Incredible. One of the biggest problems we had was trying our desperate best, where we could brand new footage to come up to the level of quality that he had set. And he had even, he subcontracted the coloring of the film and the inking of the film to 3 different companies. It was Wang Film Productions in Taiwan, there was Pacific Rim Animation in China, and Vargas Studios in Hungary. When you're watching the movie, you may have noticed that Tak's skin color changes oddly. Yeah. So it goes from like white to tan to even more tan. It's so weird. And I think because these were being colored by different studios, like there's no way that one studio is going to know that another studio is coloring Tak one way. And I think that's why he changed colors in the middle of the film. So I'm going over a lot of the changes that were made. So he cut out a lot of the scenes where the thief is stealing the emerald. There was a subplot where Zigzag tries to feed Tack to Fido.
I fear you haven't eaten yet. For you, dear bird, a special treat for breakfast. You'll have cobbler meat.
Yeah, you may have seen that as well in the Recobbled cut, because then it kind of cuts to like either like a storyboard or like these pencil sketches of just that. Any mention of the maiden from Mombasa?
A plaything from far south of Gaza. A bountiful maiden from Mombasa.
If they're trying to appeal this to kids and Zigzag...
That's definitely not a thing that you want to put in there.
But she's a bargaining chip. And it's like, oh man, this is... Whew. All right. Tack was definitely given more lines, and he was also the narrator.
As for who was going to stand up against One-Eye's army, that's where our tale begins. Little did I know that the shooting star I had seen the night before was to be my own. At the time, I was a poor orphan working as a cobbler's apprentice. Life was simple. But all that was about to change.
By more lines, you mean lines, more than 0.
No, he had one official line. It was at the very end where he said, I love you too.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I remember
So that was actually scripted. And at some points, you don't even know if Tack is the one who's speaking or narrating. And what's weird is, like, they don't add a mouth to Tack, so it's just like this inner monologue. So you're like, has Tack been speaking this whole time? Or I don't know.
That was one of the big things that stood out to me in the bit I watched, is that narration. I feel like it's like the cliche studio doesn't get the movie and adds something unnecessary to it. It's the Blade Runner effect as well. It's like, let's add a narration.
No. Yeah.
It was funny to me, like, how cliche of a move that was.
There was a subplot that was added for Princess Yum Yum wanting to prove herself as something more to her father, thus the I Want song. There's Yum Yum's nurse initially not liking Tack, but then warms up to him. Sure. The biggest scene that was added was Zigzag kidnaps Yum Yum, pushes Tack out of the way. Zigzag's horse is thrown off balance. Tack stitches up Zigzag, and Zigzag, when he's trying to escape, he hops on the Tack, and then he gets sent into the pit of alligators.
The greatest wizard has to know exactly when it's time to go.
Wait, that was in the Recobbled versions.
Yeah, the Pit of Alligators was in the Recobbled cut, but it was definitely a different sequence of events that got him there. It was still like a big hero-defining moment, coming to his own moment of Tack, but when he like launches that thumbtack, but it almost defeats him by a goof of the thumbtack bouncing around until it finally hits Zigzag's horse in the butt.
I know that scene was definitely extended a lot further, but yeah, a lot of that was cut down for the Calvera version.
From Richard Williams, the triple Oscar-winning animator of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, comes the first animated feature created in CinemaScope in over 3 decades. Featuring the voice of Vincent Price, The Thief and the Cobbler, a spectacular adventure on a truly epic scale.
At last, the film was complete, and it was released on September 23rd in 1993. But you're thinking, wait a minute, didn't it come out in 1995? Well, this was only released in South Africa and Australia under the new title, The Princess and the Cobbler. So it wasn't until December of 1994 that Miramax Films, which was a subsidiary of Disney, they actually bought the rights for the film for the North American distribution. This is so bizarre. They come out with Aladdin, and then Miramax, part of Disney, was like, hey.
I thought Miramax was purchased by Disney later. I thought it was that Miramax was the Weinstein's company, and then Miramax was purchased by Disney, and then they went and made the Weinstein company.
Disney bought Miramax in June of 1993.
Oh, wow. So they bought Miramax right as this was released.
Yep. Now, they could have just released the film as is, but you know who got in the way of that? Harvey Weinstein. and he decided to change the film before its re-release. First, they changed the name of the film to Arabian Night with a K.
With the first animated motion picture created in widescreen cinemascope in over 3 decades. Featuring the lyrics of Oscar-winning songwriter Norman Gimbel and the voices of Vincent Price.
Gentlemen, what a delight.
And Jonathan Winters.
Good morning, Arabia.
Arabian Night.
When Williams was in charge of the film was actually 93 minutes long. When Calvert took over, that film was then cut down to 82 minutes. And then when Miramax took over and Harvey Weinstein got his hands on it, the runtime went down to 74 minutes. It's like, geez. And then there was newly added dialogue inserted into the film, given a voice to the cobbler and the thief. It wasn't even like they were writing the film. These were all just punch-ups. And it was all written by Eric Gilliland, Michael Hitchcock, and Gary Glasberg. So they managed to leave in Vincent Price's dialogue as Zag, but all the new dialogue that was added to it was just unbearable.
Ooh, Mom, what are you doing here?
What am I doing here? What are you doing here? You never visit, you never call. Have you got a goil yet? Come on, what? You look skinny.
This was a big selling point, that this was Vincent Price. And since he died in 93, and they were going to come out with another movie with Vincent Price in it, like, you have to keep him in there.
Oh, yeah.
It's the most well-known name in the cast.
I rise above the human heap. The world is mine to take.
Other changes that were made: the Golden City was changed to Baghdad. Most of One Eye's slave women, they were removed.
I'm not surprised at that one.
You saw the slave women, and
Yeah.
I had some problems with that as well.
It was definitely unexpected.
In the Miramax version, they're still in there, but you don't actually see them like dancing around and like serving One Eye, or like even changing from like the lounge chair into the throne. And that's really the most action that you see out of them. And in Williams' version, there's much more to it. And like you saw, it's it's certainly problematic. Sequences with the witch were mostly removed.
He's got a big heart.
Tack, how do you feel about it?
Money in front.
So the witch had a big part in the Recobbled version that you watched. In the Miramax version, it was cut down significantly to the point where she was just like a puff of smoke. You would see her face as this smoke, and it said,
Belief in yourself is what you lack. Attack, and never look back.
and then she vanished away, and that's all she said. She didn't go through this whole sequence of like getting high and then like going and like spinning around the room and like hanging from the ropes. Like that was all impressive. It was so cool to see all that. But yeah, most of that was pretty much gone from the Miramax version. One Eye's death was cut. Instead, you can hear him just yell, "My machine!" And it was just implied that he died. Before going any further, I do want to go through the changes in the cast that the film had gone through. So Zigzag, who was voiced by Vincent Price, would remain throughout every version of the film. He had recorded his original dialogue back in 1967 and in 1973. They brought back Vincent Price back in 1990 to record further dialogue, but due to his age and poor health, some of the lines just remained unfinished. In the original version, Sean Connery was credited for speaking Tack's one line.
I love you.
I love you.
Even though it was not performed by him, but instead a friend of his wife.
What?
Connery was scheduled to record, but he never showed up. So they have a contract with him, which I guess that means that you're able to put his name in the credits.
Yeah, weird.
He's even credited in the Recobbled cut as well as Tack.
I did not notice that.
The narrator was voiced by Felix Aylmar.
The ancients had prophesied that if the 3 golden balls Wherever taken away, harmony would yield to discord, and the city would fall to destruction.
In the Allied filmmakers and the Miramax version, Tack and the narrator was voiced by the same actor. Allied used Steve Lively, and the Miramax version used Matthew Broderick.
Oh, what?
According to the prophecy, if the balls were ever removed, Baghdad would be in great danger.
Now, he took over the speaking lines, but Lively's voice is still there for all the songs.
For sure, a most unlikely match. Implausible and strange.
It's bizarre
hearing
Matthew Broderick. Similar changes were done to Princess Yum Yum. Sarah Crowe, she voiced her originally.
I am the Princess Yum Yum, daughter of your king.
Then was replaced by Bobby Page, with the exception of one line that was left in by Crowe. And Jennifer Beals voice Yum Yum.
I am Princess Yum Yum, daughter of your king.
But Bobby Page's singing voice was left in.
The thought is so dazing, I can't believe my mind.
Princess Yum Yum's nurse and the mad and holy old witch was voiced by Joan Sims.
The nice young man is fixing your slippers, Medina.
For you, I will make special price.
Next was Mona Marshall, and then they left in some of Sims' voice for a few of the lines. But for the Miramax version, they used Tony Collette.
Doing a good job, is he?
Of course he is, Nanny. The golden
My
balls.
brother, King One-Eye, possesses the golden balls.
The thief originally never had any speaking lines, but the Allied version, it was voiced by Ed E. Carl. And the most regrettable decision, in my opinion, that was made by Miramax is when they had Jonathan Winters voice the thief. And now throughout the whole movie...
Oh, these horses. Does it ever end? Oh, that's a pretty one.
He just never shuts the fuck up. Jesus. What they were trying to do or attempt to do was they were trying to make a Robin Williams type comic relief.
Yeah.
And he even made like modern day pop culture references. There's even a point where he steals the third golden ball and he says, with this, I'm going to go to Disneyland.
Oh, what?
You're gonna buy me a castle by the sea. And you're gonna buy me everything I need to turn the basement into a rec room. And with you, I tell you, sweetheart, I'm going to Disneyland.
Who needs a genie when a tack will do the trick?
Mm-hmm. It's bad. It's real bad. The Miramax version's done. The damage has been done. It was released in North America to 510 theaters on August 25th of 1995, and the reviews were mixed. They praised the animation that was done by Williams, and they bashed the song numbers and all the unnecessary dialogue, which makes sense. I actually found a review of this from the New York Times from the critic Carolyn James. Arabian Night deserved better. It's no dog, or it is a fascinating problem. Mr. Williams' widescreen animation is among the most glorious and lively ever created. The backdrops featured beautiful jewel-like mosaic walls in old Baghdad. The thief leaps and scampers like a slapstick comedian. When Princess Yum Yum and the cobbler named Tack tried to save the city from an army of one-eyed villains, the colorful battle scenes whizzed along using ingenious Rube Goldberg weapons. Arabian Night is amazing to watch. Aladdin is livelier characters and far better songs too. Now, Arabian Night seems like a pleasant enough clone with a truncated love story and weak comedy asides that are no match for its dazzling animation action. The former producer Jake Eberts thought that Miramax changes improved the film, stating that it was significantly enhanced and changed by Miramax after they stepped in and acquired domestic distribution rights. Alex Williams said the film was more or less unwatchable after the changes Miramax and Cobbler had made.
Yeah.
The movie had made just over $300,000 before the movie was pulled out of theaters in just 2 weeks. When Miramax released the film on VHS and Laserdisc, that's when they reverted back to the name The Thief and the Cobbler. Now, the first time the movie was released on DVD was in 2001, and it was only in Canada when they did it, and it was a promotional giveaway that you would find in Kellogg's cereal.
Yeah, that was something that was mentioned in the documentary, and one of the animators talking about how, like, wow, so this is what all of this work has come to, is a free disc and a cereal box.
Yeah. Jeez. Now, this would be the end of the story. A man begins his passion project, determined to make the world's greatest animated feature film of all time, for it to be stripped away, shat on, and given away as a prize in a cereal. But Williams had not given up on his masterpiece just yet. While the film was being distributed, animators from Williams' studio and animation fans began sharing work prints of Williams' original film ideas. Even though the animation was rough, not fully covered, some of it was just a slideshow of storyboards. This gave fans a look into The Thief and the Cobbler as it was originally intended. The film was compiled together and even included footage Cobbler removed from his version. So when Dick was fired by Warner Brothers, he had to give up the rights to the movie, which at this time was owned by Miramax. Williams had an idea, though. If the film was owned by Miramax, which is owned by Disney, which has their own animation studio, he could convince Disney Animation to create The Thief and the Cobbler as he originally intended with those resources. During the 2000 Annecy International Animation Film Festival, Williams got to talk to the chairman of the Disney Animation Studios, Roy E. Disney, and convinced him to create a director's cut of The Thief and the Cobbler. They would have to find all the old storyboards and work print to complete the animations, but once that was all finished, the plan was to give the movie a limited theatrical release and release a special edition DVD.
Now, would this be finished animation or with the storyboard sequences?
No, this would have been everything. This would have been a completed movie.
This was a bid not to release what they had, but to go into production to finish the movie the way Dick Williams wanted it finished.
Correct. I think everything would have been recolored, the animation would have stayed there, but it would have been finalized by Disney. Now, we live in the future, so we know that that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So going into the 2000s, Disney animation movies were not what they used to be in the 90s.
Old gray mare, she ain't what she used to be, ain't what she used to be, ain't what she used to be.
Even though Lilo and Stitch was a success, everything else was just a flop after flop after flop. Like even Fantasia was a flop.
Not to say that the movies at this time were bad, because I love quite a few of them, but not commercially successful.
The other one that came out was Treasure Planet. Yeah, that came out around the same time as well.
Treasure Planet, the movie that I have an enormous signed poster of.
So they figured that putting any effort into The Thief and the Cobbler, it just wasn't worth it. And for Williams, that is what put the nail in the coffin. At that time, that's when Roy Disney stepped down from his position, partially because of his interactions with Michael Eisner. The influence of The Thief and the Cobbler can be seen in animated films like there's the Irish films The Secret of Kells and The Song of the Sea. You can still see the influence of Williams, not just The Thief and the Cobbler, but just Williams all over the place when it comes to animation. In fact, after this was all done, he gave up on The Thief and the Cobbler. He went on to become a teacher. And with all the techniques that he learned throughout his career from working on numerous projects and learning from masters of the craft, he eventually compiled a book together called the Animator Survival Kit.
I learned what I know from some of the great animators of the golden age of animation. They invented the systems and methods that we're going to study in these 16 DVDs.
For anyone who is an animator or going into animation school or learning about animation, this is probably a book that you have on your bookshelf, or it's a book that you definitely need. So many theories about how to animate movement, how that all works, a lot of it is in that book.
Richard Williams absolutely has a ton of talent with animating, but one of the big things that made this book worthwhile is because he brought in all of these different people of different talents and different types of artistry into his company, into working on The Thief and the Cobbler. He had gathered so much skill and knowledge and things that you can do with animation that he was able to funnel into this book. The results of that book are from this great collaboration that he had constructed over the years.
I find it really humbling that he never saw himself as good enough, and everyone else that he met were masters of animation, when in reality, like, they're all just learning from each other. And if you even look back at some of the early animations like Love Me, Love Me, Love Me, you can definitely tell it's very rough, but you can see a lot of like the seeds inside Williams and eventually growing out of that and really learning and mastering this craft that he's been doing for years and years and years. Now, that's pretty much the end of, I guess, Williams' involvement with The Thief and the Cobbler. So now we're going to enter in Garrett Gilchrist.
Like any good piece of art, it moves on from the artist and takes on a new life of its own, and the audience now has a part of the story.
And he was a filmmaker that was just obsessed with The Thief and the Cobbler. And I get it. I absolutely understand the obsession with this movie. And he did his best to try and restore and put this movie together. And he even reached out and got in contact with the animators from this movie. He was getting 35 millimeter prints of the original animation. And in 2006, he compiled a fan restoration of what he called the Recobbled cut. And then later on in that year, he also made a new version of it, Mark II. I mean, like, he's compiling all this stuff together. And I'm sure, like, you could piece a lot of these things together. But, like, if you find out that you missed a scene, like, you're just going to put out more. In 2008, he put out a third restored version. And then in 2013 is when he released Mark IV of the Recobbled version.
I just imagine, conjecture on what happened here, but I would not be shocked if he puts out this cut and then news of it spreads and then more animators who have bits of footage and more knowledge, get in contact with him, and then he goes and he adds to it with this newfound knowledge, and that cycle keeps repeating.
And hopefully more animators will come out of the woodwork. Unfortunately, Richard Williams, he died of cancer in August 16th of 2019, so not too long ago.
Not even a year ago at the time of this recording.
Mm-hmm. It's sad to know that this man's lifelong goal was never actually fulfilled. His influence is out there. His book, The Animator's Survival Kit, is a must-have if you're considering a career in animation. He is so beloved that much of his work is mostly restored and compiled into a version that Williams had intended. So, will we see the fully restored version in our lifetime? I hope so. I really do.
Based off of the Recobbled cut, is this, or would this have been, the masterpiece that he was trying to make all of this time?
I think that this would have been the animated movie for animators. Like with most movies, TV shows, the thing that audiences remember is the story, the sequence, the music that comes out of it. For that type of animation, I think that would have been not really dismissed or ignored, but unnoticed by most audience members. But I think for those who know animation, I think they would have been absolutely awed by this. You look at something like The Destruction of the War Machine, and I'm just amazed by that whole sequence, knowing that none of it is computer CGI.
Yeah. When I was watching it, I showed a clip to my wife, Alexa, and it was the cobbler chasing the thief through the palace with like the black and white checkerboard stuff and riding down that staircase. And it was like, this was all hand-drawn. There was no computer aid here. This was completely drawn frame by frame.
it floors me to see that sequence and the War Machine sequence. I think it would have been a masterpiece in the animation world.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. Watching it, story-wise, it didn't stick with me. The animation is impressive, but I truly feel like one of the things about filmmaking is that at the end of the day, it is all about story, and these crazy impressive things need to be in service of a story that is meaningful as well. You know, my favorite movie of all time, I have a tattoo from this movie, is an animated film called It's Such a Beautiful Day. And while the style of this is completely the opposite, instead of these incredibly complex sequences, Don Hertzfeldt's animation with It's Such a Beautiful Day is very simplistic and surreal and absurd. I would argue beautiful and takes a ton of talent, but it's not just this beautiful, interesting animation. It is in service of a story that is beautiful and meaningful as well. At the end of the day, I feel like The Thief and the Cobbler just doesn't have the story that it needed that was deserving of this animation. You know, it's funny, like some of the animators talked about that as well. In Persistence of Vision, there was one animator saying that it was kind of a mess structurally. Dick Williams didn't know much about story. In watching this movie, I kept thinking about how this might have been better if it was the original plan of a series of shorts. Like if this was a Fantasia-style movie where it's just these series of loosely connected sequences. I mean, that's what it is, but if they leaned into that more, I guess that's becoming a common theme of this podcast, is the original idea for The Thing, I think, was the best idea for The Thing.
Yeah, and this wouldn't have been Williams' story either. Like we said, like the weak part of Williams is his storytelling, because he's not a storyteller. He's an animator. He's an animator first, and he has to come up with a story in order for him to come up with sequences for him to animate. And I know this is not the greatest example, but if you look at something like John Wick or Atomic Blonde or more John Wicks, those were made by stuntmen. The stuntman is a director. He used to be the stunt double of Brandon Lee in The Crow, and he was a stunt double for Keanu Reeves in The Matrix. Chad Stahelski, he's the guy behind it. So he started off as a stuntman. He made his own stunt company, his own stunt team. He went on to become a second unit director, meaning that if ever there was an action sequence, he was the guy who was in charge of putting that together. In fact, he was behind the Hunger Games. So like a lot of the action sequences in the Hunger Games, he was there for a lot of it for the Expendables, Tron Legacy, Captain America, Civil War. A lot of the action sequences, he was the second unit director for that. And he did the Birds of Prey recently too. And he decided that after directing all of these action scenes, he decided that he would put his hat in the ring and actually do a full movie. And that's where he came up with John Wick. Have you ever seen John Wick?
I think I watched the first one, but it didn't really grab me.
Yeah, so the story is very simple. I mean, it's not a weak story. It's a simplified story, but it's a vessel to give you the best action sequences. Knowing that this is a stuntman directing a stunt-filled movie, that makes absolute sense. John Wick, I love that movie. I absolutely adore that movie, but
somebody like me who may not be into stunt scenes for the sake of stunt scenes, it doesn't grab me.
No. And I think that with The Thief and the Cobbler, it would have fallen under the same thing. Like, the story is just not there, but the animation is gorgeous. And those who are into animation, whether they be fans or animators themselves, they would have put this up on the pedestal as one of the greatest works of art, one of the greatest animated features of all time. And for those who don't really know the complexities of animation, they'll look at it and be like, yeah, some things are pretty beautiful, but I mean, story doesn't stick with you and you don't feel or really care about the characters.
I would agree that it is a quote-unquote masterpiece, though. I feel like a true masterpiece is not possible of any sort of art, any sort of field. I don't think you can have a perfect piece of art, and I think there's always, always, always going to be flaws to be found. And I don't think you can ever have something that is truly, objectively the best of a craft ever. But having something be this great unfinished project, this grand what if, that even with the Recobbled cut, we'll still never truly know how this movie was supposed to happen, how the creators wanted it to. And that's what I feel like makes it a masterpiece. Since I don't think a masterpiece is possible, the kind of idea that what something could have been a masterpiece is about the closest anything will ever get. For projects like this, not being able to be fully realized means that we will forever be blind to what could have been the flaws in the final product. And we will forever think that it could have been the greatest thing ever. And that's kind of what makes it the greatest animated movie ever. It's just as much about the story behind it as it is about the movie itself. I do think that people should go watch this. The Recobbled cut is on YouTube for free, especially if you are at all interested in animation. This is a must-see. You have to see this.
Yeah, and what's really cool is that even with it being unfinished, you get a kind of like a behind-the-scenes glimpse of what goes into animation, and seeing like those pencil sketch versions, seeing the storyboard versions, and kind of understanding the process that goes into animation and how much goes into just one drawing, one shot, one scene, and how much work it takes just to compile and put an animated movie together. If you're at all interested in animation, definitely watch the Recobbled cut. You have no excuse at this point.
Absolutely. Do you have any other final thoughts, Dan?
I really do wish that it will be fully restored and that maybe we'll see this in our lifetime. Much like The Day the Clown Cried, maybe we will get to see the completion of The Thief and the Cobbler.
Well, thank you everybody so much for listening. This has been quite a journey, but I'm really glad that we got to go through this. If you like this podcast, you can go find more out about it at pipedreampodcast.com. Check out the other shows there. And of course, you can send emails to notgetmade@gmail.com. Let us know if there is anything we may have missed in the story. We would love to hear feedback from you. Talk to us about movies that you would love us to cover or things that we may have missed. This show is as much about us learning about these stories as it is talking about them. So anything that you have to share, we would love to hear.
You can also connect with us on Twitter at HGTNGM or on Instagram at How Did This Not Get Made. All right. And that's it. Thank you for listening.
We'll see you next time.
We'll see you in the next episode.
She